Farewell, My King, the Cult of Me podcast is all about John 3:30. He must become greater, I must become less. We have to kill our own kingship to truly understand our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And that's what we're all about.
Welcome to the Farewell, My King podcast. This is Ray Newmans and the Beethoven of book writing, Wade J. Carey. We thank you for being here. It has been a few minutes since we've been on the podcast, and boy, do we have a treat for you today. But before we give you the treat, we'd like for you to do something. I'd like for you to take the time, either during or after this podcast, all this will be in the show notes, to go check out Wade's webpage. It's wadejcarey.com. All the background story, all the fun stuff about the Beethoven of book writing is right there. He also has a Facebook page, Wade J. Carey Author. Just search Wade J. Carey Author, and that will come up. You got all kinds of free stuff as far as being able to read some chapters and look at some stuff. And then Amazon. This is where all his books are, and there's more than one, more than 10. So there's a bunch of stuff out there that touches every different type. It's just amazing. So me and Wade were talking the other day on the phone, and we had not done a sequel to the Political Matrix podcast since, when did we do the Political Matrix podcast, Wade?
I'm in my mid-60s. I don't know.
It was a while ago. Okay. So it was a couple days ago, and it was amazing. We did get a lot of feedback from this. It was a good talking point for us, but things have changed, and some for good, some for not so good. What we're going to be doing today is the Political Matrix Part 2. If you do by chance have a resume of how to host and think of really funny things to say, please send it to farewellmyking@gmail.com.
The pay ain't very good.
Yeah, because that is the way. If you need some prayer, you got a question, you don't want to go on the social media, you don't want to add something into the show notes here, but I would ask you to like and subscribe to his Facebook page, to the Farewell My King podcast that's on YouTube. Please check us out there. That helps us so much to just get this message out, and two dudes sitting around talking about the things that are out in front of our face. Wade,
Sir.
you made a chart.
I did.
Tell me about this chart.
Well, let's go to the big picture first. That's where I'd like to start. People seem to not be following the golden rule. People seem to be at odds and hating each other worse than it's ever been during my lifetime. And we talked about the political matrix, and it really becomes a situation where Satan wants to pit people against each other. And through a lot of trial and error, I worked up this chart to be the basis of a case that I make in an upcoming book, The Dark State, Enemy of the American Dream. And the core concept in it is the way the enemy keeps us separated and at each other's throats. And it's been, we've podcasted, Ray. The podcast actually started with an idea back in 2019. I've been kind of running from this because I have to make commentary on the political world, but I don't want to be a political partisan. I think it's important to examine it from, once again, the big picture of the 30,000-foot view. The core of the book, gets down to this blinding matrix. Now, we all know about the movie The Matrix. People are, used as fuel, and until you get flushed out of the matrix, you don't know that you're in it. So how does that apply to the political world and how Satan uses it as a tool against us, as a weapon, really? And that's really, how this all came about. It started with some basic concepts, and I kept adding it on, and this is where I've landed. This is what I describe in the book. I go through in great detail how it works. And essentially what it is taking the theological spiritual warfare template and laying it on top of your typical left-right political science type of charts that you'll see, where you've got conservatives on the right and liberals on the left. Well, that doesn't really encompass all that there is to life. There's something that's much more than just left-right mindsets. And when you lay a vertical axis on top of it, which is good and evil, this is what I think it looks like. And there's a lot of detail here. Let me pause for a second to see if you have anything you want to point out before we dig in any further.
Well, we also did a podcast on the lunatic fringe, which I see that word here. So please check out the podcast for the political matrix, the brutal truth of the political matrix, and then the lunatic fringe. These two will give you backstory on this. Now, Wade, when you sat down with this, and okay, you've let us know that this is this in the book, or is this the basis of the book, or is this the template that you use to prepare this upcoming book?
Book is essentially, and I've done this with some of my other nonfiction books, it is a case. I'm going to be an attorney standing up and I'm going to present a case to a jury, and that would be the reader or the listener. And that's essentially what it's all about is I think it's a way to respect somebody's intelligence without just preaching at them or telling them or acting like I got all the answers. That's not what it is. The intention is to have a discussion and get people thinking and away from emotion and just look at things rationally. Because if you have in life too much rationality, then life is empty without enough emotion. If it's too much emotion, then you lose all basis of right and wrong. And so there's a balancing act. And of course, the enemy knows that. He wants to take us out of it. But for the chart itself, it comes into play after I establish some definitions and some baselines of the case that I'm making. And then later, I apply the concepts that are on the chart here onto a chessboard and how Satan uses these things in the real world. And at the end of the book, there's 4 parts to it. The 4th part of the book is born again believer in Christ, that, I see how through his power we can conquer these things. And without his power, we are within the devil's constant attacks, and we don't know how to fight them back until we know. So this is, again, this is intended to be food for thought. I'm going to lay out a case. The reader will not be getting partisan politics, but they're going to get commentary on both of these things and how they miss the mark on what is really true and good and evil.
I mean, that's a pretty good deal. And my question that I have to you, so this is the Christian's perspective of the political scene that we currently live in. So this is not a left and right thing. This is a God thing, correct?
Yes, essentially, yes. It's a God thing, but there's a strong element of rationality, because even for someone who doesn't believe in God, you can understand the concepts. The argument about God is not really of what we see in this world as being true and not true. It's about the origin. As believers in Christ, we believe that God is the origin, and others, who are skeptics perhaps or believe other things, they can believe the origin comes from somewhere else. But what we can agree on is the truth in the chart, regardless. But you got to remove the emotions, you got to remove the partisan politics end of it. And it's interesting because I've been on both sides of the aisle throughout my life, and now I'm on neither and both. I mean, to me, to be the fullness of the character of God is represented by both sides of the aisle, but that's just downstream. The upstream is where we've got to go, all the way to the source, which is who God is and who he has shown us that he is. And that's really how it all starts. Because if you look at the Mississippi River, you don't want to examine the river from New Orleans or St. Louis or Memphis. You want to go all the way up to the source, which is Lake Itasca in Minnesota. That's true of just about everything. You've got to go to the source, and we have to look at the source of creation. We have to understand how humans are made up in order for us to understand it. And it's going to be true for believers and non-believers, because downstream we can see these things and they're evident.
So the fight that I always hear, and I believe it's become even more polarized as we've been moving through the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, there's always been political turmoil. There's always been my side, your side, but there's never been a time where there couldn't be some commonality. But what I'm seeing from this, does this speak to even in the times that we were walking across the aisle, there was something greater and maybe even not so good behind that?
Well, what this does, this carries throughout history. And believe me, this wasn't the first draft. I went through several drafts and ripped it up and went to a new one. This is a good look, I believe, in looking at the origins. So throughout history, we've seen tyrants on both sides. But here's the thing. When we go to the very character of God, see, Satan is a counterfeiter of everything of who Jesus Christ is. So God is a creator. Satan is a counterfeiter. So God has shown us through the Bible and, who his essential characteristics are, who he is. He is at once a God of law. He hates sin, and he's a God of grace and mercy. He's not either or, but what the enemy has done is he's created this blinding political matrix downstream from this character of God to where people on the right are generally, or someone who'd be called conservative, they are generally more on the law side, and they're law abiding and hate sin and that type of thing. And on the left side of the aisle, it's more about grace. And we see examples of it. For example, the Bible shows us the Old Testament is about law, New Testament is about grace. This is really the music of life. And speaking of music, you can see you have harmony, which would be law, and melody, which is grace. This is our rationality on the right and our emotions on the left, and everything flows down from the throne of God. And once we understand that, where that source is, it's easy to see how we get entrapped, because what Satan wants to do and has done is he shifts back and forth between the far left and the far right throughout history. And he's trying to keep these two things that make God God and us made in his image, his followers, those of us who are human, we're made like him in that we have to keep this balance between law and grace. And it's very simple when you realize when Satan can get people who are maybe leaning right, what he wants to do is take them and push them further right. And the further right they go, the more they move into, that's where the lunatic fringes of human thought. It is going throughout history without question. It swings back and forth. But either way, they end up in the same place, which is falling through this trapdoor. The further you go left or the further you go right, you fall through these trapdoors into an authoritarian zone. And that's where the descent toward evil happens. And that's the whole idea behind the political matrix zone, is to get people wherever their leanings are, left or right, to go further left and right. Let me stop there for a moment to see if you have anything you want to add to that.
Tell you what I'm hearing here is that this is a struggle even outside of the political arena. It is also a struggle in most churches and their
Mm-hmm.
doctrine. And I believe even as Americans, our doctrine of what America is really about has been falsified and twisted and turned, just like the doctrine of the church has been misused and misapplied. We've all heard of churches that are all law, no grace, or all grace, no law.
Yes.
Even to the point where we've had leaders that have been all law, no grace. So this is a universal thing. These concepts do follow us. So I believe the chart you have here is saying more. And I know you're pointing it to the political matrix because that's where it's based out of, but it just seems like it would be a good flashcard that when I enter into a situation, if it be politics or my faith or the church or even my job, that I kind of flip down here and look and say, okay, where is my church in this? Where's my business or my company that I work for? And then where's our government going and where are they currently at on this chart? I think this would be a good get out of jail free card to be able to look outside of your preference to see if your preference might be the problem.
Yeah, and once again, to go back a little bit in history, the Farewell My King podcast really started off as a book concept, and then you and I got together. We made it a podcast a few years ago, and then the calling around New Year's Day in 2026, it was like, okay, well, here's the book, and the concept came out. And so the book is really an outpouring of the podcasts that we've been doing. And this chart is a depiction of everything that we talk about. And the mechanics of it are really simple. is the closer you are, like a traffic light, when you are balanced between law and grace, you're at the very top. You're the closest to being where God wants us to be. That's exactly what he wants. There's the two commandments: love God with all your heart and soul. That's the law side. And the grace side is, and love your neighbor as yourself. And when you go downstream into the political matrix, you can see people who are liberal tend to be very focused on others, and people who are conservative tend to be more focused on the law. And these are both designed to work in unison. It's actually, right, it's God telling us who he is. It's right there in front of us, and we can see in our Bible. And when you look at the chart, you can see how Satan can use this, because if you're balanced between law and grace, where you're loving the Lord, or you're at least loving the law of that's morality, the moral law, not murdering and that type of stuff. When you're balanced between those two, we are exactly where we were designed to be. That is God's natural created order, is for us to be balanced between law and grace, because that's who he's shown us that he is. So when you move downstream, and you could say, well, someone's a little more conservative or liberal, they continue to fall downwards through these dotted lines. And once you are in the political matrix zone, that starts to become yellow, because then it's a warning. Because what Satan's going to try to do is once you're in the political matrix, it's like a giant fog, and we stop thinking about being both focused on law and grace, and it becomes law or grace, and you're one or the other. And when you're there, you start to move to the fringes, and that's where we got the lunatic fringes. And let me tell you something. I have had 0 people so far push back on me when I say that the far right lunatic fringe is just as evil as the far left lunatic fringe. They are both equally in error and wrong. And the further you start moving in those directions, or the more Satan pushes whatever's going on currently in history, and it's been both throughout history, typically on the right lunatic fringe, that's where you're going to have your theocracies, your religious theocracies, your religious nuts, and your monarchies. Those are far right concepts. On the left, it's your collectivism. That's your Marxism. That's your socialism, communism. And I'm sorry, folks, that's your fascism. Nazi Germany was a far left. But the thing is, it doesn't matter, because far left falls through the lunatic fringe trapdoor just as much as the far right does. But let's make no mistake about it. Big government is far left, and big religion, religious control, that'd be like your Taliban, that's far right. But they both end up in the same place, falling downward out of the political matrix, where authoritarianism is partial control by either the big religion or big government, but that falls into totalitarianism, which is total control over the people. And then we've got our great example of Nazi Germany, which was pure evil. That's where they thought, oh my gosh, let's throw some people into ovens. Let's throw Jews and gypsies and gays. They were throwing people in ovens. That's how bad it got, because that's how far they strayed away from God's law and grace balance.
Well, history tells us that there has been a lot of people at the bottom of this. Hitler being one of the most renowned ones, because, of course, there was a world war that had to happen to stop his reign. So, landing the plane for us here, what I'm seeing is that 1 degree theory, that if you take off from Gainesville, Florida, and you're heading to Atlanta, Georgia, and you're off by 1 degree, you're never going to get to Atlanta. You might get
Right.
you might get over on somewhere on the East Coast, like Virginia or something, because that 1 degree does shift the plane. The further it travels, the further it goes. And this is what I'm seeing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that in the center, we do have the balance between the liberal and the conservative side, the law and grace, which both of these are very, very key in the structure of biblical authority. But that 1 degree off, and I believe what I'm seeing in our time together through the creation of this book is that this is a warning about that, being able to stand in your own shoes and understand when the culture, politics, or even your church is making that 1 degree shift, and being able to gather these people to identify this before they ever hit the trap door. some people are going to go in here no matter what. History tells us that the trap door is there because people are going to fall through it. But I believe that we have people that are listening, and people that I hope listen, or standing up there close to that trap door about to get sucked in, and they can turn around, use that 1% theory, and look, and it's like, am I leaning too far one way? Is that right? Am I
Oh
kind of
no,
on the right spot?
that's a spot on analogy, and I have a couple of things to say about that. Is both of the trap doors, if you're looking, at the chart, both of the trap doors, whether it be on, the far right or the far left, they both have one thing in common. And this is a good litmus test to see where somebody is, because it's my contention that someone who is a conservative, who is still up in the green zone or even the yellow zone, someone who's a conservative has more in common with someone who is a liberal than the lunatic fringes behind them. And that's where we have to unite. Is you can be a liberal and still be a follower of Christ. You can be a conservative and still be a follower of Christ. But what you can't be is out on the lunatic fringes. And here is a great marker for that. On both sides, whoever's trying to shut down free speech is at the trap door or through the trap door. And throughout history, Ray, both sides have done that. When you're telling another citizen they're not free to speak their mind, you are either on the far left or the far right lunatic fringe. It doesn't matter which one, because they end up in the same place. But that is the surefire way. Who's ever shutting down someone else's free speech or attempting to is never the good guy. Never. Now, let me tell you about Satan's magnum opus of World War II. First off, when we mentioned pure evil, we say Hitler, and everybody agrees with that. Well, guess what? Stalin was down there too. Why? Stalin killed many more millions of people than Hitler did.
His own
He was killing his own countrymen. He was just as evil, but they were, see, what difference does it make? They're both down in pure evil. And what difference does it make which direction they came from? But that's my point. In studying for the Dark State book and putting the chart together, it jumped off the page at me. I had no idea before I got into it. Satan's magnum opus of evil in World War II was this. Is he was using the far left government-controlled Nazis, the National Socialists of Germany. He was using them, and basically Nazis are socialists who are racist, extreme racist. But he was using the far left fascist of Germany, and on the other side of the world, the far right imperial Japan, which is just as evil, killed just as many people, and was going after world conquest. They were authoritarian to totalitarian. They were both pure evil, but the reason Imperial Japan is they had an emperor who was like a king or a god. But see, it doesn't matter which side, because Satan had both of them going at the same time. He was dragging the Asia and the Pacific through the far right trapdoor, and he was dragging Europe through the far left and North Africa. He had both of those fires started, and they were taking the world over from both perspectives. And that's really the illustration for this, Ray, is you can't get sanctimonious and think, well, I'm a conservative and I've got it all right, or I'm a liberal and I've got it all right, when they're both wrong if they're standing just by themselves. It's got to be both. You've got to be an observer of God's law and God's grace if you're going to remain in God's created order.
Whoa. So thank you, Wade. And I know this is just a beginning. So Wade let the cat out of the bag. There is a new book coming, The Dark State. I do think this will be a book that challenges people in their faith, and then also challenges them in their politics, which I believe that there's just as many people who their religion is politics than there is people who their religion is the God from the Bible. So with that cross section being made, I'm excited for this to be in print. And I know you are. And thank you for standing in the gap and putting these words on paper and fighting off what most people who are in the middle are fearful to stand up, because there's so much radicalization on both sides of this matrix that you just pointed out. This political matrix has been so polarized and so pushed. Obviously, Satan's agenda is being pushed. And the heat is on. I think it's been on since Calvary. And it's just a little bit more fertile ground now because we have these cell phones in our hands. We have all this information. We can read the Bible in 50 different languages, but now we can't even trust the most of the news that comes on this thing. We're inundated with all this information and we have no idea if it's true or not, but it still affects us emotionally. I know for a fact that me and you've had some heated discussions on things. And after we got through talking about it, we realized, hold on, maybe we were both wrong. I mean, maybe this is a smokescreen. And what I'm seeing here and what I'm feeling is that evil is using whatever smokescreen it can to separate people from the most important thing that they need to be attached to. And that's the God of the Bible
The political
and Jesus
matrix
Christ.
zone is nothing but a gigantic tool of gaslighting, and where we have a binary choice. You can either be on the right or the left. And to me, the fullness of the Bible encompasses both. And I learned a long time ago that Greek or Western philosophy that permeates most of what we believe in the United States, everything is competitive in Greek. It's either or. Either I win or you win. And it's instead of here's how to make a bunch of good cupcakes, it's Cupcake Wars or Survivor, and everything's competition. It's zero sum game and all that. That's not the context of the Bible. Judaic philosophy is more akin to both and. So the God of the Bible is both a God of law and a God of grace. But down in the blinding nature of the political matrix, where you don't know you're in the political matrix until you get out of it, where, you know, if you're a Christian and you're identifying more as a conservative or liberal than you are a follower of Christ, then you are taking your faith and running it through the ringer or the filter of your politics, when it should be just the opposite. Politics should be acknowledged as the great divisive gaslighting weapon that Satan uses against us, because politically I describe myself as a constitutionalist. The Constitution keeps balance, and that's what the whole idea behind the chart is keeping the balance between these two attributes of human beings made in God's image. And again, if you don't believe we're made in God's image, that's fine, but you can agree a balance between law and grace. And when Satan can trick us, the more he can draw us downward in the chart, the more that he is going to keep us captive to his thoughts and drag us away from the truth that flows, like I said, from the very throne of God. Because this is serious stuff, but the answer is simple. Just understand what the enemy is doing. And that's, I think there's a tremendous fault of Christian churches today. They'll talk about spiritual warfare and blow through in Ephesians 6 once every 52 weeks and think that we're talking about spiritual warfare. Let me tell you, most of what we do is a spiritual war. People who are blinded by Satan's political matrix and all of his deception, those are people who need to understand that God is the only way. When Satan can blind us to these truths, the results are tragic. And the church is sometimes, I think, focused too much on their country club than they are sharing the gospel with the world. I mean, that's what our job is, isn't it? Right
Yeah,
now, it's, you know, it's like, hey,
yeah.
go and make disciples. It's not
Matthew
let's go,
28.
let's go and make disciples. That means make followers. That means tell people the good news. And again, you don't have to be some wacky, crazy religious person, but we all should be keenly aware that those who are separated from Christ, it's not a good thing. It's a terrible thing what's coming for them. And I wouldn't want that on my worst enemy, honestly.
Well, with that being said, please put your tray tables in the upright position. Local time is it's time for us to land the plane, and there's no better way to do it than if this is the first time you're hearing about this God person or this Jesus person and why should I do this and I do that? Well, we have a few podcasts that can help you out, that can walk you through the steps of your faith. But I want to tell you right now, right here, you can make that decision listening to this video. You don't have to be in this matrix anymore. This political matrix doesn't have to exist in your life. It doesn't have to control you. Your sin doesn't have to control you. First, you need the law. You need to admit that you are a sinner and that we have all sinned. This is not just you because of who you are. It's just us because of who we are. And
That's right.
on that cross, Jesus suffered the wrath of the Father, not because he had to, because it was the only way for us to be reunited. in any other religion besides the one that me and Wade are speaking of. The prophet what made their people subject to them. God made Jesus subject to us. He sent him into our flesh to live in our world, to do the things that we have to do, and he did it without sin, and then still had to have his life taken. So if you need more information, if this has stirred you, upset you, got you mad, well, that's part of this. I was an extremely angry person when I first heard the gospel because I wanted to be in control of my own destiny, and I realized that the only control I have is the next decision I make. And after that, someone else and something else does all the heavy lifting. And tomorrow I could live to be 90, but we just had people show up on the TV screen that, if you've ever watched TV in the last week, there's been person after person, 35, 25, 65, 28, 108 that pass away, and we do not know why or what that time limit is. So time is not on your side, not with the political matrix, not with Christ, and not with you doing what you're called to do. So we are going to finish today with one thing. Give us a chance to disciple you through this political matrix in the next coming months. Anyone who will listen to this, how to get themselves out of this. And at the end of this story that we're going to be telling over the next couple of weeks, or maybe even a few months, we're going to hand you a book that Wade has written, still working on, that is going to be a detailed, in-depth description of how far this rabbit hole really goes. Jesus is not coming back with an M16 American flag. He's coming back to take his people home. And I want you to be a part of that. I want you to be the one of the ones that goes home to him. So Wade, thank you so much. You can find him on Facebook, YouTube. Send us an email at farewellmyking@gmail.com. Reach out. This is on YouTube. You're going to be able to make some comments, engage with us. And I promise you, we will be there, even if you disagree with us. Okay. Because disagreement is where the conversation really starts. And if we can walk through this and try to stay in the center of this chart that Wade has put together, the closer we can get to the centers, the closer we can really start making change in this.
Let me just say a couple of quick things as we're walking out the door on this. And I'm glad you brought it up. This is not about the political center. This is about the theological center. And finding the theological center is the furthest upstream that you can go, and understanding who people are and how God made us and what his created order is. So stay tuned for the dark state. It is not a commentary on politics used as a weapon against humanity. Is not partisan politics. I have no interest in that. I don't use political party names 0 times in the book. This is about Jesus, and this is about how Satan opposes Jesus and how we get caught in the middle and how we have to fight our way out of it. We're going to do a pre-sale. Stay tuned. This is something you're going to want to read, even if you're not a believer, but especially if you are a believer, you're going to want to read this. And I'm going to try to take down the paradigms that Satan has built into us to where we end up hating each other and not loving our neighbors ourselves. And that is a terrible thing.
That's a wrap, people. Thank you for viewing Farewell, My King, the Cult of Me podcast. Wade J. Carey, thank you so much. Y'all have a good day.